Andrew, thank you very much. I am joined right now by one of Berkshire Hathaway's directors, Sue Decker. Sue is the former president of Yahoo. She's a board member of Costco and SurveyMonkey, and she's also the co-founder of a news aggregating platform called Rafter. And Sue, thanks so much for being here.
It's great to be here.
It's always great to talk to you about these things. I thought we could start with social media because we were just speaking with Alexis Ohanian. He talked a little bit about peak social, where he sees people kind of stepping away from the broad social media and wanting to get back to communities. We talked a little bit about what Facebook is doing to weed off some of the more extreme voices on the platform, and he thinks that that's a signal of that too. And you're obviously right in the middle of this with Rafter. You've been refining Rafter and taking it and making it more of a closed community where you have to be a college student and a verified college student to be on board with these things. What do you see happening in social right now?
Yeah, I think that's right on point. Rafter is a trusted college network, event and communications platform, and we verify the EDU, so everybody has an EDU address on it, and it's easy to identify who the user is, as opposed to a big social network where anybody with an email address or a pseudonym email address can get on and produce content that may lead to toxicity. But I think just more broadly, when you think about the world of media, these are issues that traditional media companies had historically, the issue of managing church and state, meaning how much advertising is influenced by the editorial, and also sort of editorial freedom of speech policies. But the difference is that those are closed networks, that there's a fixed amount of supply for advertising versus editorial, whereas on the internet, users create the supply. It's much more open, and so there's more of an incentive to drive usage and sell that inventory, and that can lead to some of the problems we've had.
How do we cut that off? How do you stem that?
Well, eventually, I think there's two issues. One is if the companies don't police it themselves, and traditional media companies have had these issues all the time of freedom of speech and controlling church versus state. So online, it's a more open network. It's harder because your users are creating the editorial, and you have much more incentive to drive the financials that way. So Facebook, I think, by making this move, initially they were removing content that was objectionable to their terms of service. Now they're actually removing the user accounts, and so they're taking it a step farther, which I think is a good move.
You sit on some pretty powerful boards, the board of Costco, the board of Berkshire Hathaway. And we just got a much stronger than expected jobs report, a strong jobs report that comes on the heels of a lot of strong economic numbers that we've been seeing. What do you see when it comes to the economy, when it comes to consumers, and when it comes to businesses?
I think overall the economy is doing very well. I think it's a little bit slower than last year, but not the fears that it would significantly deteriorate have proven unfounded. My guess is that we're near the peaks in the cycle, and next year may be a little slower than this year, but there's nothing showing excesses right now that would suggest there's going to be a material, significant shift downward.
What makes you think that we're potentially nearing the end of these cycles? Is it just that it's been going for so long, or do you see other things that concern you?
It's not that there's anything concerning per se. It's just that when you think about there's a lot of wind at the back with interest rates low, potentially staying low or slightly rising. So there's a little bit of a drag potentially from that. The consumer, there's a little bit of fatigue, I think, out there. You can see it in the numbers that there's just a modest slowdown. It's very modest, but there's a slowdown.
In what sort of numbers? In terms of what the consumer's doing, in terms of what you're seeing in terms of business investment? More
just what do we see in overall, like when I look at the numbers on the boards that I'm on, it's just a little, not talking about any one company or anything, but it's just it just shifted a little bit slower than it has been.
What do companies do in response to things like that? What's the typical way of trying to nimbly step through those things?
I think the companies mostly should focus on driving the competitive advantage in their businesses and not necessarily trying to manage the economy or any one part of the consumer. I think one of the things, like, for example, Costco's business has just been terrific, and they continue to gain market share. So regardless of whether the overall pool of water is a little bit lower, their consumers are doing great because of the amazing deals that they offer consumers.
I mean, Costco is phenomenal. It's been one to watch, particularly in an environment where all we ever talk about is Amazon and Walmart, and
yes,
how it's a battle between those two. To see what Costco has done in the meantime, I think that's a story that gets forgotten and gets kind of left behind, and it's doing it quietly.
Yeah,
keeps chugging along.
It's so interesting because I think Amazon, of course, is an amazing company, a juggernaut. But Costco is very complementary and different from how they do it. One of the ways that Amazon competes is on very broad selection. They have hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of SKUs, whereas Costco goes long in maybe 4,000, and so therefore they get incredible pricing from their vendors. So Costco will always be lower price. There's also a little bit of a treasure hunt. People go into the Costco and find things that they didn't expect to find, whereas at Amazon it's random access. You have to know what you're looking for. Right. Costco's much more fresh food. Amazon is there. So in a way, Costco is, I think the last two standing will be Costco and Amazon.
Sue, as somebody who's running a company like Rafter, where you're seeking venture capital funding, potentially looking at maybe going out to the open markets, you got to be looking at the markets very closely too, and what's been happening with these IPOs that we've seen recently, because there have been so many of them and such a rush to kind of get there. What do you think?
I think what's different right now is just the size of the offerings and the market value of the companies when they're coming. In the past, you'd see companies going to the public markets earlier in their development. Now they're getting to multiple stages of venture capital and much later in their development. I think what's driving the timing is that after 5 or 10 years of capital, their original investors are looking for some liquidity. And so it isn't always because they need more money. I think Lyft and Uber are big consumers of capital, but many of the companies that have gone public maybe didn't need to go to access public markets except to provide a form of liquidity for their investors.